Good evening, everyone, and welcome to What's a Lay Leader to Do Now? My name is Kim Shockley, and I'm the coordinator of Pathways for Spiritual Leadership here in the Susquehanna Conference. And I'm joined by two gentlemen tonight, and they're going to help me to talk about what's a lay leader to do now. So let me introduce first Dennis. Would you tell us a few things about yourself?
I'm Dennis Helsel, and I'm the lay leader for Calvary United Methodist Church in Harrisburg. And I've been a member here since I retired in 2013. And as such, I'm a member of a lot of committees. And we have a new pastor coming on July 1st. So I'm looking forward to that. I think as the whole congregation is welcome.
Thank you. And I also have Ken with us.
Hi, I'm Ken Bodel. I attend Westside United Methodist Church in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. I'm not a lay leader now, but I've served several stints as lay leader, as well as chairperson of the Council of Ministries, youth group leader, several positions over the years. Right now, I'm head of the small groups ministries. And so I'm excited for this tonight and to see what we can learn from each other together.
Thank you. Thank you. We had a practice session last week, so we've worked out a presentation that has me sharing some information according to what the discipline says the lay leader is to do. And then these gentlemen are going to interact with me about how we do that now. So just a few housekeeping instructions. Because this is a webinar, you will not be able to see yourself, although I can see that we have already 50 participants in our webinar tonight. We are recording this, so it will be available as a recording later in the week. If you have questions as we go along, you'll see along the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. You can click on that and type in your question. And we will do our best to pay attention to those and answer those questions as they come about. So with all further ado, let me share the screen and we'll start our work together. So what's a lay leader to do now? As I said, I'm Kim Shockley. We have Ken and Dennis with us tonight. And we are happy to be here. A big part of the work of our GROW team for the annual conference in the 2 years that I've been here has been helping to define what is a spiritual transformational leader. We had to find a way to understand those words in a way that we could communicate clearly what we're talking about when we mention that we are to grow spiritual transformational leaders. And so we say that spiritual transformational leaders engage others in abundant Christian love that transforms lives wherever they go. You'll notice in that it's not the leader who transforms lives, it's God's abundant love that does the work of transformation. It is our job to share that love with others and to engage others at that level. God does the transformation work. And I think that's important to remember as we go through. Now, a big part of being any kind of leader within the life of a local congregation is to understand why we are the church where we are. A friend of mine worked on this presentation where he talked about the tasks of leadership within the local congregation. And often when we gather as leaders, we talk about our building and facilities. We talk about our staff. We talk about the structure and the organization of the church. And we talk about our programs. And a lot of times those four areas make up the conversation that happens at a multitude of different kinds of leadership meetings. And the question I propose today is this why we exist? To have buildings, staff, structure, and programs. This friend of mine was presenting this information, and there was someone there from, I think, the Philippines, and they raised their hand and said, that's not what we talk about when we meet and we gather as leaders. We talk about how are we loving God? how are we loving everyone? How are we making disciples? And that is more in line with why Jesus wanted the church to exist, right? Because when we think about Jesus' words, we understand that the great commandment tells us to love God, heart, soul, and mind, love our neighbor as ourselves. And so we love everyone. And then in the Great Commission, Jesus told us to make disciples, to go, make disciples, teach, baptize, and bring people to him. And so this is more in line with why our church exists. Now, I get to visit and consult with a lot of churches. Over my career, I've worked in hundreds of United Methodist churches all around the country. And in every one of them, there's usually a little bit of a triangle within the square. And that can be of different sizes depending on the life of the church. But the reality of what we're talking about today is that we've got to flip this around so that we focus more on loving God, loving everyone, and making disciples. And we talk about our buildings and our staff and our structure and our programs in terms of how they help us love God, love everyone, and make disciples. For instance, I love to pick on Trunk or Treat. It's a really fun event that a lot of churches try to do in the fall to engage their neighbors in a fun way. And if we do that event for the sake of the program, then we might miss the opportunity to, how are we loving God through this? How are we loving our neighbors as we do this event? And how are we making disciples? And you can probably already begin to see how having the triangle in mind would help you to have a program that would actually meet the need of the community as well as the why of the church. And so I'm trying to just paint a picture here about the why being the focus of our conversation. So my dream in reality is that we as local churches would focus more on the why, love God, love everyone, make disciples, and that each person within the life of our church would also be developing their ability to love God, love everyone, and be a disciple, and maybe even make more disciples. And so that's what this picture is depicting. As I bring up all these little triangles, they represent the people in the life of your church who are also working on loving God, loving everyone, making disciples, and being disciples. And sometimes we do this work outside of the church. We have folks who are in doing their ministry, what they're called to do. And we have folks who are outside of the church functioning as they engage others in abundant Christian love that transforms lives wherever they go. Our community leaders, our teachers, our nurses, our doctors, people who are, have a vocation where they interact with people in meaningful ways. These are all ways that God calls us and God uses us every day. So if we can help keep this picture in mind as we talk about the work of a lay leader tonight, I think we'll have a fruitful evening. So the first thing I want to talk about with Ken and Dennis is, what's your initial reaction to this framework for how we think about the work of the church?
Well, for me, it was an education because soon after I joined the United Methodist Church many, many years ago, I was put on the finance committee. And my background was being a CFO, chief financial officer for some multi-billion-dollar, million-dollar companies. And the bottom line is the bottom line, and you have a balanced budget and everything goes. So I go into the meeting and we were putting a budget together, or the group was putting a budget together, and there was this faith offering. And I immediately raised my hand and asked, okay, what's a faith offering? And they said, well, we're going to believe that God is going to reach people and meet our needs. Well, initially I said, well, that isn't going to work. We can't go in with a budget that has a fake entry. But I soon learned that if you love God, love everyone, and making disciples, your mission becomes beyond a building's budget and financial. And you need to have faith and pray to the Lord that you're going to make it without cutting programs that extend the church in the community. And for the last 40 years, that's been the modus operandi. And, we've met the budget every year. So I learned.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts, Ken?
Yeah. I grew up at West Side, then moved away. And I came back about 35 years ago. And I could see when I came back to West Side that the people at West Side really lived out the triangle. They did ministry outside the church. The church had its structure, you had the finance committee, but as a group, many people express their faith working at the hospital, working with the area agency on aging, working with scouts, and they lived their faith as triangles outside that box. Then all of a sudden a wave came through the church that we needed a program and market to a specific group of people. And I think we moved from being triangle to being the square. And I could see that it has affected how we've lived out our faith maybe the last 20 years. We have become more focused on the square. And now we're trying to move back into being the triangle people that we're called to be and used to be. And I think, so I think from hindsight, I would say, yeah, it's going to take some changing at a lot of places, because for so long we've been told it's the square, but really it's not. It's that big triangle: love God, love everyone, make disciples.
Thank you. Someone just asked that I reintroduce you because they evidently didn't get on fast enough, but Ken Bodel was just speaking. He's at West Side Church in Clearfield, and Dennis Helsel is at Calvary Church in Harrisburg, and they're both either previous lay leaders or current lay leaders, and so we're happy to have them with us today. So in terms of the triangle and the square, what does this mean for you as leaders and disciples of Jesus?
For me, it means that I'm in a process in my stage of my life. I don't want to do church. I just want to be a disciple. I don't want to be somebody that fills a slot in the box. I want to be a triangle. And my daughter got me a book called Becoming Sage, and I read for Christmas, and I read that, and I said, yeah, this time in my life, this is what I want to be. And I think as a leader, you just don't want to be somebody in an organization overlooking people. You want to be a Christian. You don't want to do a Christian. You want that love and everything just to flow out of you. And I think that for me, that's what this type of thinking reemphasizes for me, the need to be a triangle. I don't want to overemphasize that enough, but it sort of fits with the way we're talking about this.
Right. Beautiful. Thank you. Any thoughts, Dennis?
Well, for me, it's very simple that, I've been the chair of staff parish. I've been the chair of church council. And to me, I think the triangle speaks very loudly relative to being a servant leader. And I think if you're a servant leader in those positions, the triangle emerges, and people around you, they're lifted up into the triangle whether they want to be or not. So from the leadership down, if you're a servant leader, it's tough for people that are on your committee not to be.
Right. Oh, thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and look at what the Book of Discipline tells us about being a lay leader. And then we're going to ask some questions and dialogue about how we do that today. This is from the Book of Discipline 2016. The first responsibility of a lay leader is fostering awareness of the role of the laity within the congregation and through their ministries in the home, workplace, community, and the world, and finds ways within the community of faith to recognize those ministries. So for me, the question is, how does God want to use me or each person in my local church now? You notice it's awareness of the role of laity within the congregation. When I worked in Western North Carolina, what I discovered there as a culture was the laity. The role of the laity within the church was generally to say, well, we hire our pastor to do that. Mm. And, that's just not healthy. That's not what God intended. I don't believe in terms of what the church is all about. I think everyone should have some role, some way to live out their discipleship of Jesus within the community. So I wanted to be able to, Ken, you already said this beautifully. This is about how are we to be the people that God can use for God's purposes. Another person that I ran into, Evelyn Underhill, she said, God made us in order to use us and use us in the most profitable way for God's purpose, not ours. To live a spiritual life means subordinating all other interests to that single fact. And I found another quote from Parker Palmer. He says, vocation, which I interpret as, what is God calling me to do? Vocation does not come from willfulness. It comes from listening. I must listen to my life and try to understand what it's truly about, or my life will never represent anything real in the world, no matter how earnest my intentions. So to a certain extent, this image that we've already talked about fits with that first part of, what it means to be a lay leader, fostering awareness of the role of the laity within the congregation, throughout their ministries in the home, in the workplace, in the community, and the world, and find ways for the community of faith to recognize those ministries. In the course of your work as lay leaders, either past or present, what kind of opportunities were there to recognize the work of lay folks within the church and the community?
I sort of looked at the question when we talked last week. Mm-hmm. I think we recognize that we are all called to love God, love neighbor, and make disciples. And I think as far as recognizing that is, we have to recognize that for ourselves. People get so worked up about what's the will of God for me. Well, the will of God is to love God, love your neighbor, and make disciples. It's that simple. And so we do that inside the church through our ministries, for sure. But we also do that in our daily lives. And I think part of the job of lay leader is to help people do that in their daily lives, to build them up, that say, hey, yeah, you're looking for something, but God just wants you to do this. And the other opportunities then come along. Mm-hmm. You have those, that has to be your foundational base. Mm-hmm. And you have to be consistent in it, both inside the church and outside the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
I think you have to look at, a lot of us take a committee or look at a committee, and when we say they're made up of good Christian lay leader or laity in the church, so therefore they're going to bring to this committee, love God, love everyone, and make disciples. But sometimes we forget that the committee has its own identity.
Hmm.
And they, even though they have members that practice this as a committee, it's different. And they have to be reminded that the committee needs to express love God, love everyone. And in doing that, somehow that committee needs to be recognized as the committee. And that may be, in our church, we have slides before the service that run through and recognizing the different committees
Okay.
that do mission work.
Mhm.
And as we grow, what I found was a lot of the congregation had no clue the different mission committees we had, that we're out in the community doing things. So the more we can recognize the individuals that have the committee identity,
Mhm.
better off we are.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's look at the second responsibility. This is a good one: to meet regularly with the pastor and discuss the state of the church and the needs for ministry. So I would ask the question, how are our lay people finding ways to live into a calling for ministry as we meet the needs within the community? And what is the plan to free and prepare people for leadership? These are things that you can talk about with your pastor as you meet regularly. Can either of you talk to how you meet regularly with the pastor and what that looks like? And how you're helping to connect the dots between the state of the church and the needs for ministry?
Currently, since our new pastor doesn't arrive till July, I've been meeting every the first Wednesday of each month by Zoom.
Mhm.
And we go over a list of questions and answers that he has and I have relative to the laity in the church, the congregation, and where we go from there. There's an interesting development out of there because I've had to have a very close relationship with a staff parish chair,
Mhm.
because if you're not careful, you don't build that relationship, there can be a sense of you're overstepping your bounds. You're crossing over into areas that the staff parish chair thinks is their sole responsibility.
Mhm.
So I encourage you, if you're trying to do this one, that you make sure that the staff parish chair, you and he or her are on good working relationships, and you both understand you have a mission to work with the pastor. One is the laity and the other is the organization of the church.
Right. And that's a great distinction, Dennis. Because the lay leader's job really is a liaison between pastor and the rest of the lay people in terms of spiritual development and ministry. So that's a really good distinction. Thank you. Ken, did you have any thoughts about this one?
It's just that I would say my experience, I've had always a good experience with my the pastors that I've served with. I feel I try to keep the community. We always try to keep communication open. They sort of had an open door policy for me. They trusted me enough. I had an open door policy for them. I could share whatever with them, and it was in confidence. It was in confidence, and I think that's one of the things I think a lay leader needs to do is when you're meeting with your pastor, things come up, and you got to be able to keep a confidence as you discuss ministries, needs of the community, maybe even just who's hurting inside that congregation. I think that's one thing. As far as how often we met, well, we're on all the committees together, so we met constantly together. But there would be, I would say I try to meet once a quarter at least. One pastor would take me out to lunch every quarter, just the two of us to talk. But I think it's having an openness with each other. And I think, and having, being able to keep a confidence, you got to be able to trust each other.
Right, thank you. That's so important. There were some other questions that came up. So let's look at this second one. What do you do to pay attention to the needs for ministry that the church can respond to? Is there a time or place when you in your regular daily life are paying attention to the needs of the community outside the church? I think I just threw you a curveball. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna practice that question.
well, I think when we had the Council of Ministries as part of our structure, the Council of Ministries, a lot of times that's where that question would come up, not just with the pastor, but before the whole congregation. Especially since there was such a diverse group of people on that committee. And so it was easier then. Now, unless there's a specific study group or something dealing with an issue, that doesn't flow quite as easily. Now, if you're going out looking for something, one of the best, I've been told this, and I agree with this, one of the best persons to have is if you got a school nurse in your congregation, that's who you reach out to, because they know they really know the heartbeat of what's going on in the community.
School nurse, school counselor, those folks really do pay attention to the people around them. Yeah, that's great.
I think, Kim, we also as lay leaders have a responsibility to be aware of the local news.
Yeah.
One of the things at Harrisburg, we still have a paper, and I go through there and read about programs that may be started in the area around the Calvary United Methodist Church. And then I try to bring that to the pastor or whatever, or to the church council and say, okay, do we want to get involved in this? Do we want to help this? Or are we do we have the facilities to better handle this? So I think we as lay leaders need to be very aware of the goings on in our immediate community.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
And I would add to that, Dennis brought up a good point there. And one of the things that I've been attempting to do, I'm not very good at it yet, is one of the things I've been attempting with the start of this new year is pray my local news. There's so much going on in the community. And I ask myself, as I pray about the situations in the local news, I ask myself and pray, God, where are you in this? God, where do you want us as a congregation to be in this? And God, where do you want me? Do you want me to be in this? And I haven't had a miracle breakthrough or anything yet, but it's developing, like Dennis said, that sense of awareness of what's going on in your community.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So the third question here is about plans to free and prepare people for leadership. One of the things that's kind of a movement right now throughout the conference is this move to a simplified, accountable structure where we kind of combine all of our committees into one leadership team. And one of the philosophies behind that is that we have less people making decisions, and so that allows more freedom and flexibility to other folks to actually be engaged in a ministry and do more hands-on ministry. So I'm not sure that that's always happening all that well, but it is something you can talk about with your pastor. How are we making space and preparing people for leadership? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think most churches in the area are facing a dilemma as the leadership ages. How do you replace them? So part of the training needs to be, I think, classes in most of the churches about how to prepare the next generation to be the leaders. And that's tough because you have an elderly congregation with leaders that don't want to give up their chairs or don't want to give up the rotation of every 3 or 4 years they're back on. But yet they want to do less because we're retired or we're having a lot of fun with our grandchildren. So I think there has to be some classes, some Sunday school classes or evenings Bible study based on preparing the next level of leadership, 35 to 45-year-olds, to take over these committees.
Mhm. Okay, I was just checking on the chat. I had some statements there that unfortunately aren't quite the direction we were going tonight. So I'll have to think about that and get back to them. So let's go ahead and look at the next of the responsibilities. This is number 3, and this is the one that is kind of tricky. The lay leader has a membership in the charge conference and the church council, the committee on finance and committee on nominations and leadership development, and the committee on staff parish relations, where, along with the pastor, the lay leader shall serve as an interpreter of the actions and programs of the annual conference and the general church. And then it says, to be better equipped, it's suggested that the lay leader also serves as a lay member of the annual conference. So my question generally, and I'm going to answer it first, how can you become more informed about the initiatives of the annual conference and general church so that your church can be in collaborative mission with other United Methodist congregations? Well, first of all, we have this annual conference sends out a quick link email, QUIK link, every Friday that basically just gives a little short look at everything that's going on and what opportunities are coming up in the next week or shortly thereafter. So getting subscribed to that quick link email would be one way to stay informed. We do have the regular link that is the newspaper that comes out electronically every other month that, of course, gives you lots of information. And, you know, our general church, I get an email every day from the United Methodist News Digest that tells me what's going on. And they're quick little things. I can read more or I can just hit the highlights. So right there, you know, off the top of my head are 3 ways that we have here within this annual conference to stay informed about the initiatives and what's going on in the life of the church. So let's look at this next slide because I wanted to share this as an example. I tend to think of the lay leader as the leader who has influence because they're engaged and involved in all these other places. So the example that I thought of, did you know that it's the responsibility of the Staff Parish Relations Committee to identify, encourage, and empower laity who might be experiencing a call to vocational ministry? That, within the life of the church, the Staff Parish Relations Committee is supposed to be helping groom new folks for vocational ministry. So the lay leader can influence this work in your role as a lay leader. And my example is if the Susquehanna Conference retires 25 pastors a year and only ordains 4, what does this mean for our future? Who is doing the work now of raising up new leadership? They come from the local church. And I would encourage all of you who are on here tonight, if your church has not raised up anyone in the last 10 years who is, you know, actively seeking and finding a way into vocational ministry, that raises some really important questions about the work of your church that, you know, that is ready to have folks called to be in ministry. So who needs to help our people hear God's call? We are all in this together. And I think that's important for us to remember as we move through. So what other thoughts do you have, Ken and Dennis, about our influence in all these places where the lay leader has a voice?
As we talked about this a couple weeks ago, for me, it was easier for me when we had the old structure, because part of my job as lay leader, and I think, and as far as influence goes, was to help the congregation keep their mission and purpose in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that fit in also with the mission and purpose of the church, the conference, and the church, Methodist Church Universal? And so as we on all these committees, I would have access to maybe 60 to 100 people to share and keep that in front of. Now under the simplified structure, maybe it's 10. And so therefore, it's going to take more intentionality on the part, I think, of the lay leader to get that message out, to share that message, to keep that focus on what our mission and our purpose is. I'm not saying it's harder, but it's definitely different,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what the structure of your church is. Now, I also understand that I think also it doesn't always have to come from the pastor. If you're in a smaller, my daughter's a pastor, and she's pastored some small churches. And sometimes they expect the pastor to make to explain all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes you as the lay leader have to be the person that's doing the explaining, because the pastor is up there and the pastor has influence, but the pastor also is a pastor.
Yes.
You know, some would say speaking the church line. The pastor has to say what the pastor's saying.
Right.
But you, as you don't know how much influence you have as a lay person that stands up there and shares that. And it brings it down to, yeah, he's one of us, we're one of him. I get that we are in this together.
Yeah. Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think another way the lay leader has influence in all these different committees is during the conversation to be able to ask the question, where is God here? What's God doing among us? And to take that more of a spiritual look at the conversation to see if we can identify God's work among us. Let's go ahead and look at number 4. Continuing involvement in study and training opportunities to develop a growing understanding of the church's reason for existence and the types of ministry that will most effectively fulfill the church's mission. Here we talked about this at the very beginning, so it's a little bit of a review. But the question is, how can you help your local church understand and get excited about its reason for existence? So what kind of thoughts do you have about that?
I think the critical to this whole process is the congregation as a group has to understand what the mission is of the church. And it's amazing when you ask the congregation, individuals, what is the mission of Calvary United Methodist Church? And generally, they can't express it. And I think that's a failing of the leaders, failing of me as a lay leader, that's not prominently displayed, prominently used, redundant, many times re-echoed through newsletters. I think we missed the boat in that process.
Yeah, when I've worked with congregations to redefine their why or their sense of purpose, I usually work with a group of people together because then they own that statement in a new way. and they all have an opportunity then to share it. And so it multiplies its acceptance within the congregation if everybody uses that well.
We're going through that right now because we have a new pastor coming, and the conference, the district is offered direction in that. And I'm part of a committee that's meeting to try to identify exactly what our mission is for Calvary. And then that's the easy part.
Yeah.
You identify the mission.
Yeah.
You got to make sure that it's distributed, that everybody in the congregation understands it.
Yeah. And I think that is where working with the pastor is really important. At Westside, our mission statement is to know, love, and proclaim Jesus Christ. It took us a long time to get there. At one point, I think we had a paragraph that nobody knew.
Right.
And we finally got it down to that. And that has been our mission statement for quite some time now, and through several pastors. Pastor comes in, we want to talk about the mission statement. No, the mission statement is this, pastor.
That's great.
Now the pastor have used the pulpit then at times. That's a sermon series.
Yes.
Okay, for us to examine how are we living this out. The pastor, and I think the lay leader, should then also, as you're on these committees, filter everything through that mission statement. Okay, how does this, we do a trunk or treat type of thing. How does trunk or treat fit into know, love, and proclaim Jesus Christ?
Yeah, exactly.
And then that's type of thinking as you work your way backwards. Yeah, now it does free up because, hey, maybe there is this thing we do that we really don't have to do it anymore. We're just doing it out of habit. Let's let it go, and let's free some people up to do some ministry that fits this. And that's hard work. I'm going to tell you something. That's hard work. People's feelings might get hurt, but you as a lay leader have an opportunity to then sort of keep this mission in front of your congregation in that respect. And I do think, I believe this, prayer has to be a big part of it. You have to pray in and through that mission statement, and pray into your congregation, pray into your pastor, that you are fulfilling that.
Thank you. Yeah, this work is a prayerful work. It's not something you can do just sitting down around the table for a minute or two. And like you said, sometimes you have to grow into it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Well, then these last two things that we're going to look at here. Actually, that's a great question. This is my foundational question when I work with the church. How does God want to use us now? That's the question that leads us to mission and vision. How does God want to use us now? It's a worthy question for conversation. So these last two responsibilities of a lay leader kind of go hand in hand together. And so we're going to kind of talk about them a little bit together because some of the things we needed to say work for both of these. So number 5 says, assisting and advising the church council of opportunities available and the needs expressed for a more effective ministry of the church through its laity in the community. So the question we want to ask is, how am I paying attention to the giftedness of our people and the needs of our people? To me, this is one of the reasons why the lay leader is on the nominations and leadership development team, so that they can help draw lines between the giftedness of the people and the roles and positions available. That is one use of the lay leader in that regard. But I love the the fact that this is through its laity in the community. So it's about how we reach out as well. So what kinds of thoughts did you have about that?
Kim, I think the key here is knowing our congregation. And if you're a large church, that becomes a problem for a lay leader, because how can you advise if you don't know individuals other than hi on Sunday, nice to see you here, and then there's no contact during the week. And COVID has really created additional problems for that. But I think we have a responsibility as lay leaders to identify spiritual gifts. And if that requires us to do a spiritual gift survey once a year or whatever, or when people show interest in something, trying to help them find their spiritual gift, because a lot of people in the congregation are searching for that. That gives them that gives meaning to their life.
Right.
And we need to assist that.
Yeah, thank you. Ken, we talked about the I see in you as the way in which we interact with people when we see their giftedness. And I know you had a really significant story about how we practice I see in you.
Yeah, before I get to that story, I want to dovetail off something Dennis said. And the spiritual gift inventory is good, but you as a lay leader, if you've been in that congregation a while, you've seen people grow. You've seen God work in their lives and that they grow. And some people will say, well, I didn't score well on that in that spiritual gift inventory. Well, spiritual gift inventories, your spiritual gifts grow as you grow. And I think you as a lay leader have an opportunity to say, yeah, but I see in you this. We as a cluster met with our district superintendent at that time, Dr. Kathy Kind, and she put a program on called M3 for us. And then during that, we would break into our individual churches to discuss things. And I came up that we have a lady that has been our mission coordinator forever. She has expanded the mission program remarkably, and she's involved a lot with conference mission work. And it's awful hard trying to find somebody to say, oh, I'm going to have to do all that. And I talked to somebody and I said, but I see in you doing part of that job. I see in you working in the local missions. I see the love you have for people. I see how you interact with them when they come in. We can break this job down. We can break it up and have a conference liaison, but you would do well. I see in you all that is needed for missions. I said, I see in you how you put these little mission projects together. Now, she has not taken that position yet, but I think it gave her food to think about that and how God has used her. And maybe God is calling her to something a little bigger. I think I see in you is a way for you to not manipulate people, but to let them see their spiritual growth and see how God has helped them grow.
Just about every one of our young clergy or candidates in ministry right now throughout the conference, just about everyone that I've had some conversation with has told me that somebody said to them, I see in you gifts for ministry. And that's the way they came to hear their call, was because somebody else confirmed it. So this is a huge role for the lay leader that goes along with everything else we've been talking about. It's kind of a pay attention kind of role. So the sixth thing to mention here is informing the laity of training opportunities provided by the conference. Where possible, the lay leader shall attend training opportunities in order to strengthen their work. The lay leader is urged to become a certified lay servant. And here, this goes back to that awareness, getting the quick link, knowing what's available, those kinds of things. And, you know, if you're interested in becoming a lay servant, we've got that process is already worked out. And we actually have new material this year that we're using to help folks. So we asked this question, how am I practicing IC&U conversations and inviting people to be trained for leadership? Ken gave us a great example about IC&U. Dennis, you were going to mention the Be a Disciple courses, I think.
Well, for me, it's when I became lay leader and I found out that really the lay leader was a position that nobody had done anything in the past 10, 15 years. I had to take a step back, say, what did I volunteer for? But fortunately, the district led me to some Be a Disciple classes. They talked to me about certified lay servant process, and I started enrolling. But if somebody hadn't taken an interest in me, I would have never found out these classes, never been able to participate. Even the GROW conducted by Kim, I wouldn't have known about if I hadn't talked to the district because our church was not advertising those opportunities.
Yeah, and that's another way of getting information. Every district in our annual conference produces some sort of district lay newsletter that lets you know of lay servant opportunities and all sorts of interesting information. So that's another place you can call your district office and get on their distribution list.
Yeah. Also, Kim, what I like to say that, you know, even after your tenure as lay leader is over, you're still a lay leader, and you can still practice the IC&U even after that, because it's part of helping people grow in their faith. I also, long after your pastor's gone, hopefully you're still there.
Right.
And it's awful hard for a pastor who doesn't know anybody, especially during COVID. You know, our current pastor hasn't really met with too many people because since she's got here, the place has been shut down.
Yeah.
And so you are a person that the pastor can lean on because you see in people because they haven't got to know them well enough yet.
Right.
And that goes then back to your nominations committee, which the pastor, that's the only committee the pastor's the chair of.
Right.
And so the pastor can lean heavily on you to help fill those slots because the pastor doesn't know anybody.
Right.
And I think so. IC&U, I think, is a great way to help people find their ministry and to grow in their ministry, and even then urging people into some of these other areas, such as lay servant, lay speaker, and things like that.
Right.
I had a pastor that urged me to take the lay speaker course, and it really has changed my life and how I grow and who I've become.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you. So one more little resource from a book that I just love. Elaine Heath wrote this book, God Unbound, Wisdom from Galatians for the Anxious Church. The first part of the book starts a little slow, but she gets to this chapter where she talks about 4 postures of contemplation. And this is a way of being that I think is really important for, especially where we are in a church now. We've mentioned COVID several times, and ultimately what COVID is providing is a unique opportunity to refocus who we are and how God wants to use us. And, you know, it's my prayer that we're taking advantage of this opportunity we have right now. Elaine said there's 4 postures of contemplation. The first one is show up, be present. How many of you have driven in your car for a long period of time and you suddenly realize, I don't remember the last mile? You know, that happens to me from time to time. And it's like I lost focus on where I was. My mind was paying attention, my body was paying attention, but somehow I missed it. And what Elaine encourages us is that show up, be present, try to stay focused on where you are and what you're doing. Secondly, pay attention. And if there's a role within the life of any local church that is the pay attention job, I think it's the lay leader, the pay attention person. Notice who's gifted, notice what the needs are, notice what's the pastor going through, how do I partner with my pastor. Notice these things, pay attention, and be aware of what's happening. And look for where God is in the midst of all the stuff that's going on. I love that. Pray the news, that read the news, pray the news, pay attention, and then look for ways that God is active and participate with God. Now, the fourth one is really tricky. She says, we show up, we pay attention, we participate with God, but we have to release the outcome. Because God is God and we are not. Now, what does it look like to release the outcome? So I'm going to go back to the trunk or treat example and say, most of us as local church people, our expectation when we host an event like trunk or treat is that at least some of those folks are going to show up in our church on Sunday morning, right? That's what we expect. So what happens when it doesn't happen? When they don't show up on Sunday morning? And what happens over the course of a year when we've tried several things and people don't show up like we expect them to? And people don't come to our worship time because that's what we do. Elaine says to release that outcome because we don't know what God's really doing in the midst of all those events where we were present and paid attention and participated with God. We don't really know what God is doing. And so we have to release our outcome, our expectations, and keep showing up and paying attention and participating with God. Because if we get disappointed that our expectations weren't met, then guess what's going to happen? We're not going to show up. We're not going to pay attention. We're not going to participate with God. And I hate to even think it, but I suspect that that may be why some of our churches are in sorry shape today, because we've gotten disappointed and we've forgotten that our role is to show up, pay attention, and participate with God. It's God's job to grow the people. It's God's love that brings transformation, not my expectation. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't have hopes and dreams for people, but we can't get so wrapped up in them that we get disappointed and we stop doing it. Okay, so that's my little thought about showing up and paying attention. And like I said, lay leader, pay attention person. I think that's a key job for the lay leader. So to wrap up tonight, we talked about some book resources that we found particularly helpful we wanted to share with you. The first one is Witness Your Why. It's a lovely little book written by Reverend Jeremy Scott, who is a clergy person in the Rocky Mountain, well, no, what are they called now? Big Sky Conference, I think. Rocky Mountain, Yellowstone, all those states out there in the West. Jeremy wrote a lovely book about a small church he was serving and what happened to them as they defined their why and lived into their why, meeting a need within the community. It's a beautiful little book, Witness Your Why. It's, Simple Harmony is a lovely book written by Reverend Larry Duggins, who's from Texas, a clergy person there. He uses a Celtic cross image to talk about how we connect with God and neighbor, how we receive and give. in a kind of a fourfold way of discipleship. It's a beautiful little book. And Dennis suggested Spirit Gifts, One Spirit, Many Gifts, written by Patricia Brown, that really helps would help the lay leader to identify the gifts of folks within the congregation. Did you gentlemen want to say anything about these resources?
I just wanted to add one because I think it's helped me tremendously, and it's by William Carter, and it's called Each One a Minister. And there's a great scriptural basis for every member of the congregation to be a minister. And that basically means bringing disciples to Christ. Doesn't mean you're ordained, doesn't mean that you're can be participating in the rituals of the church. Just means here's what our responsibility is. And it fits back to the triangle. Love God, love everyone, make disciples. But it's one each one a minister, William Carter.
Okay, thank you.
I just like to say that that book, Witness Your Why, it's very easy to read. It gives the writer writes in very plain language. It's a great book, and I think he gives you a lot to think about. And I think especially when they talk about he talks early in the book about nuns and duns. And there are a lot of people, folks out there that are nuns. They have no reference point for Jesus Christ. And they are a huge group of surrounding our churches. And they just need to know that they're loved and that God loves them. Right. And it's a really great book. And I would highly recommend that book.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So both Witness Your Why and Simple Harmony are resources that we have on our book reading list for the Grow Living as Spiritual Transformational Leaders material. And because I just mentioned that, let me tell you more about that. We are offering Grow Living as Spiritual Transformational Leaders, both as a lay servant class that can be taken for certification as a lay servant or a lay speaker. But it could also be used as a resource within your local church. And if you have questions about that, you can email me. We basically have 8 sessions: practicing the presence, generous gratitude, discipleship as relationship, living as spiritual transformational leaders, where we actually work on developing your own personal vision and focus for living your life. Then we talk about change makers for God, what it means to have vision and values for the local church. And then we talk about mentors that multiply, which goes back to the IC and U conversations. And then the last 2 sessions, Reach, Love and Witness in Action, and Community and Collaboration in the Commons. We use the book, Jeremy Scott's book, Witness Your Why, to highlight those 2 chapters. So it's a really exciting curriculum. We've been rolling it out this past year, and I'm getting such lovely evaluations, people who are really experiencing a life kind of changing experience through the material, sense of clarity about how God wants to use me now. And I'm finding that to be very, very, very exciting within the life of the annual conference. So one final interaction here is about our way of being. And ultimately, for our annual conference, our way of being is really expressed in the term beloved community, and how we become a beloved community of God for all people to express God's love together. And the best way I know of to do that is how I practice my relationship with God in public. And so for me, that message comes from Galatians 5:22 and 23. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. To me, the fruit of the Spirit is evidence of God's work in my life. And so if I want to reflect on how I'm living a faithful life, I look to how am I showing love today? Where am I experiencing joy today? How am I being patient, kind, good? And that's something I can control for myself, to reflect on that myself. So the question for all of us is, who are you while you are doing the job of lay leader? Are you embodying the Spirit everywhere you go? Gentlemen, any thoughts about that as we bring our event to a close this evening?
Kim, I was just looking at the Q&A, and we have
Mhm.
3 that we haven't touched. And one is anonymous, but it's, are we open to the people most in need? And as lay leaders, obviously that's a responsibility.
Mhm.
But we can't do that unless we know our congregation. So I think we are open, but we're limited because of our lack of knowledge, especially in a bigger church. Smaller churches is a little easier. You know the person next to you. You know what they're feeling. You know what they're going through. When you got 2 or 3 services in a given Sunday morning, it's tough.
Yeah.
The second question is, how can lay leaders help the church face today's challenging issues? How can lay leaders help build the beloved community? I think part of it is, and I'll take a stab, but part of it is just being educated. I mean, there are classes out there that would specifically deal with this. Grow is one of them. And how can leaders help build the beloved community? And I think that's living it and experiencing it with others.
Yeah, thank you. And that really fits with who we are as we love God, love others, and make disciples. I see another question here about taking the test to find out about spiritual gifts. And I would suggest that you go to umc.org and just type in spiritual gifts in the search area, and it will take you to a place where they have an assessment already provided. So again, that's umc.org. Type in spiritual gifts in the search, and it'll take you to an assessment.
Okay.
And
I think
actually define those spiritual gifts for you as well.
I just like to close by saying I'm kind of Zoom novice here, so I'm not seeing the questions. So, but I would say, just you are called to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, whether it is as a position of a lay leader or just being in the community. Okay, and I think it goes back to those triangles of loving God, loving people, and sharing and making disciples. And I think when we talk about the fruit of the Spirit, as God puts that fruit in your life, you have to realize that fruit is not for you. The fruit is for the community of faith. The fruit is for your community that you live in. Fruit isn't for the tree. Fruit is for others. And so, you are bearing that. You are bearing God's fruit. As far as a couple of those questions, as far as building the beloved community, folks, I struggle with this a lot. I talk about building unity. I try as a lay leader or as a person in leadership not to get into any type of political discussion in church. I try not to use the Bible to assert my own opinion. I try to keep the focus on Christ and Christ alone. Christ crucified, risen, crucified, buried, and risen. That's our focus. One of the devotions I read is Oswald Chambers. my utmost for his highest. And he says, if you're using the Bible to support your own opinion, you've missed the boat, because the Bible directs us to our Savior, Jesus Christ. And that's where you have to keep the focus. I know that that's hard. So I think one of the things you'll find in that Jeremy Scott book is he has a quote: nobody ever argued anybody into being a Christian. You know, it's not helpful. And so I listen with an open mind, but I always try to balance it against scripture, and I always try to point us back to Christ. I've always tried to do that as a leader in my congregation. And I'm not quite sure what the other question was, but that was the one that struck me.
It's okay. That's a powerful testimony, Ken. Thank you. Okay, well, it looks like we've covered everything that has come up on the chat or the Q&A. So let me just pray and we'll be done this evening. So let's pray together. Holy God, we thank you for these men and women who are called to be lay leaders throughout our annual conference. We ask that you hold them close, that you protect them for your purposes and help them to focus on you and your desires for their church and their community. Help us to show up, to pay attention, to participate with you, and to release the outcome so that you can be God and we can see your power at work. We thank you, God, for this opportunity together tonight, and we ask that you bless us all. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody who's attended. And if you want a recording of this, it is recorded. And if you want the PowerPoint slides, you can contact me at the conference office. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.